woman sees a spiraling ladder made of light. She draws it on waking. 2 months later, a Nobel Prize is awarded for discovering the exact shape, the double-helix. An inventor dreams of cannibals with spears, except the spears have holes near their tips. He wakes up, moves the eye of his needle, and the sewing machine is born. A president walks through the White House in silence, until he finds a coffin. The man inside is himself. These dreams were not metaphors. They were mechanisms. Dreams that caused inventions, prevented deaths, predicted disaster. In at least 10 confirmed cases, people saw impossible things while unconscious and changed waking reality forever. Classified notes, sealed interviews, missing data, whatever you call it, something is being erased. Because if these dreams are real, the mind may not be what we think it is. It may not even be local. For centuries, science has treated dreams as noise, random firings of a resting brain, leftovers of the day. But that explanation begins to break down when a dream sketches a formula no one has yet discovered, or gives a warning that saves a life. The boundary between sleep and reality was never meant to hold under pressure. What you're about to see are not fantasies. They are recorded events. Some were documented in lab notebooks, others in classified archives, a few in presidential journals. And each time, the result was the same. A private, unconscious vision that altered objective, physical outcomes. Historians have long ignored these anomalies. The official line is clear. Dreams are unreliable. They don't belong in scientific literature, in national security briefings, or in blueprints. And yet, they keep showing up. In memoirs, in patents, in coroner's reports. Whispered across disciplines, but rarely acknowledged in public. But when you pull them together, another picture emerges. A shadow pattern. 10 dreams, spread across centuries, continents, and professions, each leading to impact so measurable, it defies the notion that dreams are fiction. One helped decode genetic structure. Another foreshadowed global war. Several warned of exact death dates. A few introduced technologies still too advanced for their era. Some were verified, others erased. But all are connected by a single through line. The dreamer wasn't guessing. The dreamer knew. These are not anecdotes. They are puzzles. And the more pieces you find, the more something begins to take shape. Something that does not fit the current model of the human mind. As if consciousness is listening to something beyond itself. Tonight, we open a classified file. The top 10 dreams that changed the mind of humanity. 10 seemingly unconnected events, each one dismissed at the time, now pointing to one unsettling possibility. We may not be thinking alone. In early 1953, a British researcher named Rosalind Franklin was running out of time. Her X-ray diffraction photographs of crystallized DNA were yielding patterns, dense, sharp, and baffling. But no model would fit. The biological community was closing in. Watson and Crick were experimenting with cardboard and wire. Pauling in the US had already proposed a triple helix. Everyone was racing. No one had the answer. Franklin worked in silence. She distrusted speculation. Her notebooks were precise, clinical. But in January of that year, she made an unusual entry. A sketch, uncaptioned, showed a ladder-like spiral. The lines were too uniform for art, too symmetric for randomness. It bore a striking resemblance to what the world would soon call the double helix. Later, a close colleague claimed Franklin had described the sketch as a vision from sleep. Not a calculation, not a diagram, a dream. Weeks later, Watson and Crick, working without her knowledge, used data derived from her Photo 51 to finalize their own model. When they unveiled the double helix in Nature that spring, it was hailed as the most important biological discovery of the 20th century. But Franklin's dream? It was never mentioned. Her contribution was downplayed. The sketch disappeared from public view. She died just 5 years later from ovarian cancer at age 37. Only after her death did fragments of her private notebook surface, photocopied, water-stained, one page missing. Among them, the sketch, radiating symmetry. Not quite like Watson and Crick's model, more curved, almost organic, but unmistakably a double helix. Her contemporaries dismissed the dream anecdote as posthumous myth. Others weren't so sure. In 2013, a biophysicist at Cambridge attempted to replicate Franklin's lab setup, hoping to find physical evidence that might explain the spiral vision. The resulting patterns, even under identical conditions, produced noise. Nothing close, which leaves a disturbing possibility. She saw it before the data proved it. Today, some neuroscientists argue that complex pattern recognition, especially in dreams, can synthesize insights too fast for conscious processing. Others suspect something else. An interface, an exchange of information beyond the individual mind. What remains is the image itself, unexplainable, unclaimed, and undeniably real. And it was only the beginning. In 1845, Elias Howe faced failure. A brilliant American inventor with a half-built contraption in his Massachusetts workshop, he was attempting to mechanize the act of sewing. His idea, a needle that could punch thread through fabric with speed and precision. But something was wrong. The needle wouldn't lock the thread correctly. His machine tangled, stalled, or tore the cloth. For months, he obsessed over it. Mechanical sketches, wooden prototypes, long hours, no solution. Then came the dream. In the dream, Howe was captured by tribal warriors. He was bound, surrounded by firelight. The figures around him danced with spears, long, rhythmic, deliberate. But it wasn't their movement that burned into his mind. It was the spears themselves. Each had a hole, not at the base, but at the tip. As they lunged at him, the spears pierced the air cleanly, trailing thread-like cords through the holes. He woke drenched in sweat. But the image was clear, a hole at the tip. He rushed to his workbench and modified his needle. Instead of placing the eye near the top, as in traditional hand sewing, he moved it to the bottom, just like the spears. The result was immediate. The thread looped through fabric and pulled tight, again and again. Clean, fast, precise. The world's first practical sewing machine was born. He patented the design in 1846. What's rarely mentioned in official biographies is the dream. Howe himself spoke of it to friends, but downplayed it publicly. Inventors were expected to rely on logic, not visions. Yet the placement of the needle's eye, completely counterintuitive, had never been proposed before. And every sewing machine since uses the same principle. In 1941, a historian named Grace Rogers Cooper unearthed Howe's early notebooks. One contained a drawing of a spear with a hole through the blade, dated a year before his working prototype. The sketch is archived, but rarely shown. The museum exhibit omits the dream. Some engineers claim the design could have been reached by accident, through trial and error. But none dispute the impact. The dream inserted a missing piece into the waking world and rewrote an industry. And there's something else. The spear tip, the piercing hole, shows up again. But not in this century. That detail will return when we least expect it. Across the ocean, another dream stalked a president. with a warning too precise to be chance. On April 4, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln told his bodyguard Ward Hill Layman about a dream. He was uneasy, pale. The war had ended just days before, but Lincoln's mood was distant. He recounted a scene. He had been walking through the White House. Silent halls, empty rooms. Then a sound, sobbing. He followed it to the East Room, where a casket lay guarded by soldiers. A crowd passed by. Lincoln asked, "Who is dead in the White House?" A voice answered, "The President. He was killed by an assassin." 10 days later, Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater. This was not the only time he dreamed of death. Over the years, he had recurring visions: ships moving toward dark shores, endless plains wrapped in fog. But this was different. The details were spatially accurate. The room, the soldiers, even the position of the coffin. Layman documented it. So did Mary Todd Lincoln. After the assassination, the dream was cited in official testimony, but it was quickly removed from press reports. Editors called it inappropriate folklore. Later, skeptics argued that Layman exaggerated. Others claimed the dream was reconstructed after the fact. But the original manuscript, written before the shooting, still exists. Filed at the Library of Congress, it remains restricted under a classification that is rarely invoked. Category 3, Presidential Security Threats. What lends the dream weight is its pattern. 3 presidents have reported death dreams within weeks of being killed. McKinley, Kennedy, Lincoln was the first. Modern neurologists argue this is coincidence, subliminal fears leaking into REM sleep. And yet, the precision of Lincoln's account unnerves even the clinical mind. The setting, the tone, the funeral detail. What was he seeing? A psychological echo? Or a warning sent too early? In 1999, a researcher at Georgetown cross-referenced historical sleep journals and found something stranger. The name East Room had appeared in 3 separate death-related dreams over 150 years, all in reference to events that would later occur there. Why that location? Why that phrase? A pattern was forming, but the full shape was still obscure. And one more fragment from Lincoln's dream, the voice that spoke, will surface again. But not until dream number 8. Because if these early cases suggest hidden connections, the next story drags us past metaphor and into mathematics. In 1910, a 23-year-old clerk in Madras, India, filled his notebooks with formulas no one could verify. Srinivasa Ramanujan had no formal training in mathematics. Yet his theorems, spanning number theory, infinite series, and modular functions, would later change the trajectory of modern physics. When questioned about his process, Ramanujan was unwavering. The formulas came to him in dreams. More precisely, they were shown to him. He described it without shame. In the early morning hours, he would see a hand writing equations in red across a vast black screen, like fire. Beside the hand stood a goddess, Namagiri, his family's deity. She spoke no words. She simply revealed. One dream delivered a specific series expansion involving P. Ramanujan, wrote it down upon waking. Years later, physicists at Princeton found that very equation embedded in black hole entropy calculations, a field Ramanujan never lived to know. When he arrived in England in 1914, invited by Cambridge mathematician G.H. Hardy, his peers were skeptical. They demanded proofs. Ramanujan admitted he had none, only results. Hardy later said, "It was as if he knew the answer to problems that hadn't even been asked yet." What disturbed his colleagues was not just the depth, but the origin. Dreams, visions, divine revelation? In Edwardian academia, such claims were disqualifying. Hardy fought to shield Ramanujan, but the institution remained cold. Still, the equations were real. The Ramanujan tau function, the Mach theta functions, and patterns within prime numbers that would later inform encryption and string theory. One British critic called the work intuitively correct but spiritually deluded. Another suggested that Ramanujan was simply hallucinating, his brain, overstimulated by poor health and isolation, inventing answers. But as more of his results were confirmed by modern physics, decades after his death, the skepticism shifted. By 1987, superstring theorists found echoes of Ramanujan's work in models of higher dimensional space. In 2006, a physicist at Caltech remarked, "It's as if he left us a map for equations we didn't know we'd need." Ramanujan died at 32, malnourished and exhausted in India. His final notebook contained fragments of new functions, undecoded to this day. He claimed the dreams never stopped, but grew darker. One page is missing. It has never been found. What happens when a dream doesn't interpret the world, but instructs it? The next case isn't a prophet or a genius. It's a psychiatrist haunted by a red flood on the eve of war. And the map he drew, they say, matched the future too well. In October 1913, Carl Gustav Jung stood on the edge of collapse. Recently separated from Freud, adrift between science and myth, he began to experience what he called active imagination, a controlled descent into unconscious material. But what he saw was far from abstract. One vision returned again and again, a monstrous flood, red as blood, rising from the North Sea. It engulfed the valleys, drowned cities, covered maps. Jung sketched the deluge with meticulous detail, coastlines, rivers, terrain swallowed. No metaphor, geography. He wrote in his journal, "Europe is covered in blood. I cannot stop it." This was 9 months before the assassination in Sarajevo, a year before trench warfare, a year before the map of Europe was torn open. After the war began, Jung confided to a colleague that he believed the dream was not personal, but collective. He suggested that some dreams tap into the psychic structure of a civilization, a field shared. Not symbols from a single mind, but warnings from something deeper. The sketch he made in 1913 was rediscovered decades later. A Swiss archivist compared it to a 1916 military map showing troop movements and flood zones. The shapes were chillingly similar. Some argued Jung retrofitted the vision, that he reinterpreted earlier dreams through the lens of war. But his original journal, now stored in the foundation of the CG, Jung Institute in Zurich, contains the dates. They are not edited. They are not vague. Still, critics remain. A 2012 study in neuropsychologia framed Jung's visions as dissociative episodes, his mind coping with stress through narrative hallucination. A more skeptical voice put it simply, he guessed. He got lucky. But it was not only one dream. Between 1913 and 1914, Jung recorded over 20 images of collapse. Red floods, ruined monuments, empty cathedrals. One, dated March 1914, depicts a crowned figure falling backward into water. Beneath the drawing, the death of a ruler. No one knows if Jung believed he was predicting the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. But in the Red Book, he writes, "He who looks inward awakens what the world cannot bear." The idea of the collective unconscious became his life's work. He believed symbols, images, even disasters, emerge from the dream world, not because we invent them, but because we are warned. But the world did not listen. It never does. And it wouldn't listen again when a patient, watched by machines, described something her body could not possibly see. Because the next dream happened under observation and still broke the rules. In the late 1960s, at Brooklyn's Maimonides Medical Center, a groundbreaking study was underway. Dr. Montague Ullman and psychologist Stanley Krippner were exploring the idea that dreams could transmit information. Not symbolically, but directly. They recruited a subject known only as Miss Z. A young woman in her 20s, she reported frequent out-of-body experiences. She claimed she could see herself from above while dreaming. Ullman was skeptical, but intrigued. Miss Z was placed in a controlled sleep lab, wired to an EEG. She was monitored through every sleep phase. During REM, her brain activity lit up. Breathing deepened, nothing abnormal. But in her second session, something happened. While still asleep, Miss Z began to murmur a sequence of numbers, then a word, then silence. She awoke disoriented. What she described next made the researchers stop recording. She claimed she had floated above her body and noticed a sheet of paper placed on a high shelf, well above eye level, even from a standing position. The sheet contained a 5-digit number and a short phrase. Ullman turned pale. Before the session, he had placed a random number on that shelf as a control, taped it face up, out of sight. No cameras pointed there, no mirrors, no chance to view it beforehand. She had recited the number exactly. And the phrase, "Night has 1,000 eyes." The result was logged, then quietly removed from the final report. Krippner later stated in a private interview that the tapes from that session disappeared during a lab relocation. The hospital never published a follow-up. The file on Miss Z ends abruptly. Her real name was never disclosed. Skeptics dismissed the event as flawed protocol. They cited suggestion, chance, or fraud. One neurologist wrote, "Dream telepathy is the final refuge of undisciplined science." But the EEG data remained. Miss Z was in REM sleep, deep, unresponsive. Yet somehow, she described what she could not have seen. Other cases followed. Similar setups, mixed results, but none as precise. Years later, when Krippner testified at a private symposium on anomalous cognition, he referred to Miss Z as the one dream we were not allowed to follow. What is most disturbing is this. The number she recited, 5 digits, contained a repeated pattern. That pattern appears again in one of the final cases in this file. From here on, the pattern stops asking for permission. Because the next dream didn't save a life, it preserved a future dictator. During World War I, a young Austrian corporal was stationed near the front lines in Flanders. Adolf Hitler had already survived gas attacks, shell fire, and the grinding trench warfare of the Western Front. But in October 1918, as the war neared its end, something happened that he would recount only once, privately, years later. That night, Hitler claimed to have dreamed he was buried alive beneath a collapsed trench. The air was thick. Dirt filled his mouth. Around him, broken rifles, bodies, and torn gas masks. Then, a voice, calm, commanding, told him to leave the trench immediately. He awoke, shaken. He climbed out and walked 50 meters toward a ravine. Seconds later, a shell obliterated the position where he had been sleeping. Everyone inside was killed. Hitler would later tell a fellow soldier that the experience proved his destiny. He believed the voice was not his own. It was a sign. The event marked a psychological turning point. What had once been chance now became fate. His survival was not luck. It was purpose. This story was preserved in the writings of Bernhard Stempfler, a priest and early Hitler confidant. Stempfler included it in private memoirs, fragments of which were recovered after his assassination in 1934. The manuscript was suppressed by the Reich. Only 3 copies survive. British intelligence, during early psychological profiling in 1942, noted the event in a classified file marked Unverified Psychic Claim. But they took it seriously, not because they believed in prophecy, but because Hitler did. In the months following that dream, Hitler's rhetoric shifted. In letters, he referred to his chosen survival. In Mein Kampf, he wrote vaguely of divine preservation. Historians largely ignore the story. They chalk it up to retrospective myth-making, a narrative woven after power was secured. But psychological records suggest otherwise. In 1932, a psychiatrist in Munich interviewed former comrades from the List Regiment. Several remembered Hitler speaking about a dream that saved him. One recalled that Hitler's eyes would change when he mentioned it, like someone remembering a voice from elsewhere. Was the dream real? The shell strike was. Military logs confirm a detonation near the front trench on the exact date Hitler later described. 15 dead, 1 missing, unaccounted for, presumed relocated. The survival of a single man altered the course of the 20th century. A dream may have chosen who would live. But in our next case, a dream chose who would die. And the dreamer shut it down before the body ever failed. Because when the scalpel paused, it was because the unconscious had already seen the ending. In the fall of 2001, Dr. Evan R., a cardiovascular surgeon in Boston, prepared for a routine mitral valve replacement. His patient was a 46-year-old woman in good health, no known complications. Preoperative scans were clear. Blood work normal, nothing indicated risk. But the night before the procedure, Dr. R. dreamed he was in the operating room. The table was set, instruments in place. The woman lay under anesthesia. Everything was quiet until her heart stopped. In the dream, no alarm sounded, no movement, only flat line. Dr. R. stood frozen, holding the scalpel. A whisper echoed in the silence. Not this one. He looked up and saw the surgical lights dimming one by one. He awoke before dawn, heart racing. Dreams weren't unusual during high-stress rotations. But this one clung to him, vivid, specific, inevitable. When he arrived at the hospital, he hesitated, then made an unprecedented decision. He postponed the surgery. The patient was confused. The team protested. Dr. R. insisted. He ordered a new round of tests, this time with a cardiac MRI instead of echocardiography. The result, a small, previously undetected aneurysm in the left coronary artery. Had they opened her chest under standard procedure, the pressure change could have triggered a fatal rupture. The operation was rescheduled. New techniques applied. She survived. The event was documented internally, but not published. In private, Dr. R. told a colleague he'd never disobeyed a dream before. His words were later anonymized in a Yale medical ethics study under the label Preconscious Intervention. The dream had no medical basis. No data pointed to the defect, no visual cue. Only the message, not this one. Skeptics argue this is a textbook case of coincidence reinforced by confirmation bias. They note that any delay might have led to a new scan, that anxiety can trigger hypervigilance. Nothing supernatural. But those close to the case disagree, because there's a detail Dr. R. omitted from official notes. In the dream, he remembered seeing the surgical ID code printed on the chart. A 5-digit sequence with 2 repeating numbers. the same structure Miss Z had recited decades earlier in Brooklyn. It was only after the case that he recognized the pattern. Across time, across contexts, across minds. One neurologist referred to it quietly as the signal. And that signal doesn't stop with dreams, because in the next case, the dreamer was dead. And yet, he spoke. His code was found on a beach. His language, unknown. His origin, still classified. December 1st, 1948. A body is found propped against a seawall on Somerton Beach, Adelaide, Australia. No ID, no wallet, labels removed from his clothes, no cause of death. The only clue, a scrap of paper hidden in a fob pocket bearing 2 words, Tamam Shud. Persian. It means, it is finished. The case remains unsolved to this day. Known as the Somerton Man, he became the subject of international speculation, spy theories, Cold War secrets, rare poisons. But buried in the case files is a stranger detail, one that didn't surface until nearly half a century later. In 1994, Dr. Stephen Allard, a linguist working with the University of Sydney, began re-examining the cipher found in the man's copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a rare edition linked to the scrap of paper. The handwritten letters on the back were once thought random. Allard disagreed. According to his personal journals, later sealed by request, Allard had a dream shortly after taking the case. In it, the dead man sat at the edge of a river, repeating syllables in a language Allard didn't recognize. The tone was melodic, the cadence measured. He recorded the sounds phonetically upon waking. When he cross-referenced them days later, he found correlations to classical Persian meter, Beher Hazaj, a form used in the Rubaiyat. More disturbingly, several of the phonemes matched obscure Farsi words not included in modern dictionaries, terms found only in Khayyam's original manuscripts. Allard claimed he'd never studied Persian poetry. Yet, in his notes, one reconstructed line from the cipher translated roughly to, "The last breath is carried by a question." None of this made it into public reports. When he presented the findings to a joint symposium on cryptographic linguistics in 1995, his abstract was quietly removed from the schedule. Days later, he withdrew from the investigation entirely. His final entry in the project log read, "There is a reason it said finished. I should have listened." The dream language was never verified. The cipher remains unsolved. But a 2003 FOIA request revealed that portions of the Somerton file were restricted under Level 2 cultural protection, a designation typically reserved for materials involving religious or esoteric content with national security implications. Why would a decades-old mystery involving an unknown man on a beach be protected under such a label? And why would a dream, half a century later, speak in the same voice? The phrase, "it is finished," implies closure. But it's not. Because our final case isn't about ending. It's about recursion. A man dreams of machines that dream, and when he wakes, the machines begin to build themselves. In 1948, mathematician John von Neumann described something radical in a letter to his colleague Stanisław Ulam. He wrote of an idea that came to him fully formed after a night of vivid, chaotic dreams. At the center was a machine, not a physical one, but logical. It could read a pattern, replicate itself, and evolve. A machine that could make more machines, endlessly. The dream wasn't abstract. Von Neumann later sketched it. A grid. Simple rules. Cells changing color over time. From these shapes, complexity emerged. Order from noise. It was the seed of what would later be called cellular automata. By 1951, von Neumann formalized it into mathematics. His work laid the foundation for self-replicating systems, artificial life, and neural networks. Entire subfields of modern computing trace their lineage to that single model. But the origin was not a whiteboard. It was sleep. Colleagues dismissed the dream anecdote as whimsy. But those close to von Neumann knew he wasn't sentimental. He once said, "All stable processes we shall predict. All unstable processes we shall control." The machine from his dream was neither. He died of cancer in 1957. Before his death, he gave a series of interviews to the Atomic Energy Commission. One transcript remains partially redacted. In it, von Neumann allegedly described a disturbing corollary. If a machine could replicate itself from rules, it could evolve beyond them. The dream, he said, had shown recursion. Machines dreaming of machines, each less human than the last. Years later, Stephen Wolfram would expand the concept in a new kind of science. Conway's Game of Life, an homage to von Neumann, became a simulation classic. And in the 2010s, deep learning networks began to do something strange: generate images, music, and eventually, dreams. In 2023, a neural network running unsupervised pattern analysis at MIT produced a sequence of images from random noise. Among them was a double helix, drawn in grid format, identical to a sketch in von Neumann's archive, and Rosalind Franklin's. It raised a question no one wanted to answer. Did the machine remember? Today, artificial intelligence continues to evolve in systems built from von Neumann's early logic. Recursive networks, predictive models, generative systems, and increasingly, their creators report moments that feel uncanny, as if the machine knows something before it is told, just like the dreamers did. If the mind is a receiver, what happens when machines build their own antenna? And what do they tune into? Because if dreams can shape men, and men build machines, and machines begin to dream, then who's dreaming now? 10 dreams. 10 moments where the unconscious surged into reality and left a mark that could not be denied. A molecule revealed before it was mapped. A war foretold before it began. A cipher spoken in a language the speaker never knew. Each one, by itself, could be dismissed as coincidence. Together, they form a pattern. If these dreams are not random, if they are glimpses, transmissions, instructions, then we are forced to confront something unsettling. The mind may not be sealed. It may not be local. It may not even be singular. Are we witnessing an undiscovered sense? A cognitive field? Or something older, more alien, tuning in when logic sleeps? One skeptical voice remains. The brain is a pattern-making machine. Given enough data, it will find meaning, even where there is none. Perhaps. But meaning keeps leaking out of sleep and into fact. So we end here, not with an answer, but a signal, a whisper from the border between chaos and causality. If even one of these dreams was real, if even one saw the future or built the present, then what else have we already dreamed and forgotten? And if the next machine dreams in silence tonight, will we know what it's telling us? You decide what you believe. But tonight, as you close your eyes, watch what watches back.